long before Europe's colonial reach carved borders into the soul of Africa. There was a storm rising in the south, a name whispered with awe, with fear, and with fury. Shaka Zulu. To some, he was the greatest military mind Africa ever produced, a unifier, a strategist, a nation builder. To others, he was a tyrant, ruthless, paranoid, and cruel. How does a child born from rejection become the founder of one of Africa's most feared and respected empires? How does a man raise a kingdom on the blade of a spear, only to fall to betrayal by blood? History is rarely kind, but in Shaka's case, it may also be incomplete. This is not just the story of a man. It's the story of Africa's resistance, its resilience, and the complicated legacies of its kings. To understand Shaka's rise, we must return to his beginning, a beginning steeped in shame, hardship, and survival. A kingdom was not given to him. He carved it with sweat, fire, and fear. He turned warriors into armies. He turned tribes into a nation. But was his vision of unity worth the rivers of blood he spilled? Or was he simply a product of a brutal time, facing enemies from within and beyond? Shaka Zulu was born in 1787, not into royalty, but into rejection. His father, Sundiata Keita, was a Zulu chief. His mother, Nandi, a woman of the Alangene clan. Their union was frowned upon, their child unwelcome. Banished from the royal court, Nandi fled with her son. They wandered from clan to clan, often humiliated, sometimes starved. Shaka grew not in comfort, but in hardship. They mocked him, beat him, called him Unfin, wild monkey. But inside Shaka, a fire was building. He learned early that power was taken, never given. That survival meant transformation. As a teenager, Shaka entered military service under the great chieftain, Dingiswayo of the Mtetwa people. Dingiswayo saw in Shaka something others missed. A mind made for war, a heart forged in fire. Here, Shaka reimagined war. He discarded the long-throwing spear, the assegai, and invented the iglo, a short stabbing spear for close combat, brutal, personal, meant for killing, not threatening. He tightened ranks, taught discipline, and enforced ruthless unity. He didn't just build warriors, he built war machines. Dingiswayo gave him command. Shaka delivered victory. By the time Shaka's father died, he was no longer the outcast. He was the storm. And in 1816, after his half-brother was swiftly removed, Shaka seized the throne of the Zulu people. From exile to emperor, the birth of a king had begun, but it was only the beginning of what would become. A reign written in blood, brilliance, and betrayal. 1816, a new sun rises over KwaZulu-Natal. The child who once walked in shame now marches in glory. Shaka Zulu is king. But for Shaka, being king wasn't enough. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to reshape Africa. Under Shaka's command, the Zulu nation exploded in size. One by one, neighboring clans fell, not only to Zulu spears, but to a new form of military genius. Shaka transformed tribal combat into a science. He designed the legendary bull horn formation. The chest engaged the enemy head-on. The horns flanked from both sides. The loins, held in reserve, delivered the final blow. No mercy, no retreat. Victory was survival. Defeat was extinction. Shaka's warriors were more than soldiers. They were his shadow. They walked barefoot over thorns, ran 50 miles in a day, slept with their spears beside them. And Shaka ruled with iron will. He banned marriage for soldiers, executed deserters without hesitation. Loyalty wasn't optional, it was enforced. As the Zulu expanded, some called it unification, others called it terror. Entire clans vanished, absorbed, or destroyed. This time of upheaval would later be called the Mafeking, the crushing. Across southern Africa, fear spread. Waves of migration followed. New kingdoms rose, like the Satho, Swazi, and Ndebele, all shaped by the shockwaves of Zulu might. Was Shaka building a nation, or burning down others to forge his own? To his people, he was a visionary. To his enemies, a tyrant cloaked in black brilliance. But power, once seized, is never safe. And in the shadows of Shaka's glory, jealousy, fear, and betrayal were beginning to whisper. The seeds of his downfall had already been sown. Absolute power burns brightest just before it consumes itself. By 1824, Shaka Zulu stood alone at the summit of southern Africa. But the summit is cold, and the air thin with paranoia. His power was unmatched, but so was his suspicion. He trusted few, loved none. Then tragedy struck. Queen Nondi, Shaka's mother, died. She was more than a mother. She was his anchor, and the only person he ever showed tenderness to. Her death shattered him, and in that madness, he unleashed one of the darkest chapters in Zulu history. Shaka commanded the entire kingdom to mourn. No milk, no harvest, no joy. Over 7,000 people were executed for mourning incorrectly. Pregnant women were slaughtered. New crops destroyed. It was grief turned to horror. Shaka became unstable. The land trembled beneath his rage. What he had built with brilliance, he now ruled with blood. Opposition grew quietly. Brothers began to conspire. The empire he forged with fire would soon face betrayal from within. Among those plotting were his half-brothers, Dingaan and Mangana. But Shaka did not see it. Or perhaps he refused to. The lion had roared too long, and the jackals were circling. In every empire born by the spear, the blade eventually turns inward. Whispers of rebellion echoed through the kraals. Shaka's paranoia had turned his allies into enemies, and his brothers, Dingaan and Mangana, saw their chance. Shaka alone. It happened in 1828. Quiet, swift, brutal. then silence. Shaka was lured into the shadows, a place where warriors waited not to salute, but to strike. The great Shaka Zulu, murdered by his own blood. No funeral songs, no monuments, just silence. The tyrant was gone, the visionary silenced. His death marked the beginning of internal decline. Dingaan seized the throne, but he lacked his brother's genius. The empire Shaka built with courage and cruelty began to crumble. And from the ashes of one empire, another arrived, the British, the Boers, the colonizers. The death of Shaka Zulu removed the only barrier strong enough to hold for an ambition. In less than a generation, colonial powers would divide Africa, piece by piece. Shaka's legacy was buried beneath conquest and rewritten by those who feared him most. History remembers its titans in fragments, some carved in stone, others in scars. Shaka, Kasenzangakona, was no mere king. He was a force of nature, one who bent time and tribe into something new, a nation. He revolutionized warfare, but he also revolutionized governance, centralized leadership, taxation, discipline. Shaka laid the framework for what would one day be called the Zulu Kingdom. To the west, he was a tyrant, a black Napoleon, a savage to be feared and erased. But to his people, to the land that still whispers his name in the wind, he was a Shaka, the founder, the unifier, the spirit of resistance. Today, the Zulu nation stands strong. Its language, music, customs, all trace lines back to the spear of one man. From the hills of Kobulawayo to the Parliament of South Africa, the shadow of Shaka still walks. Was he a tyrant, or a visionary, or was he the price Africa had to pay to remain unconquered for one more breath? This was Shaka Zulu, visionary, tyrant, king, legend. And here's Ancestral Files, where we uncover the untold stories of Africa. Subscribe. Long before the name Timbuktu echoed through the courts of Europe, it was simply a nomadic settlement at the edge of the desert. A meeting point, a rest stop, a place where water met sand and camel met cargo. Its name, Timbuktu, is believed to come from a woman named Buktu, who guarded a well. Tin means place. Tim, Buktu, the place of Buktu's well. A humble beginning for a place that would rise like gold dust from the wind. By the 12th century, West Africa was booming. The Ghana Empire had already traded salt for gold. The Mali Empire was rising fast, and in the fertile plains between the Niger River and the encroaching desert, small trading outposts began to thrive. Timbuktu became a magnet for traders. They came with salt slabs on camelback from Togoza, gold nuggets from Bambouk, cloth and weapons from Morocco, and books, always books, from Cairo, Fez and Al-Andalus. But it wasn't just goods that passed through Timbuktu. It was ideas. The city began to attract scholars, seekers of knowledge, poets, jurists, astronomers, herbalists, and architects. As word spread across the Sahel and beyond, Timbuktu began to change. From trade hub to a university town, from a desert outpost to a spiritual and intellectual beacon. The Niger River fed the people, the sand guarded their secrets, and the minds of Timbuktu began to dream beyond the dunes. But how did this trading town become the center of African scholarship? What drew minds and merchants alike? The answer lies in power, gold, and a ruler whose name still bends the arc of history. To understand how Timbuktu became a jewel of the world, we must trace the gold. Because in ancient West Africa, gold wasn't just a currency. It was a weapon, a message, a source of divine power. By the 13th century, the Mali Empire had absorbed much of Ghana's former glory, and at its heart ruled a dynasty of kings who understood something Europe hadn't yet fully grasped. That trade and tolerance could build empires. Gold flowed from the south, traded for Saharan salt, Berber horses, North African weapons, and most of all, knowledge. It was during this golden age that Timbuktu was formally absorbed into the Mali Empire, under the reign of Mansa Musa's predecessor, Abu Bakr II, and then, more famously, Mansa Musa himself. The city's location was unmatched, sitting between the Saharan trade routes and the rich inland kingdoms to the south. Caravans would carry goods over 1,000 miles, enduring brutal sandstorms and weeks of travel, just to reach Timbuktu. There, at the heart of this convergence, merchants traded not just gold for assault, but ideas for influence. And while Timbuktu gained wealth from taxes, trade, and market stalls, it also gained something far more powerful: global attention. Arab geographers and historians began to take notice. Timbuktu, once just a local name, began to appear in chronicles as a place of wisdom and wonder, a city rich not only in gold, but in intellect. Its fame spread from Fez to Cairo, from Mecca to Venice, and later, even to Lisbon and Seville. But while the world heard of its gold, it was about to witness something more precious rise from the sand, not in the form of a coin, but in the form of a classroom. While the gold made Timbuktu famous, the manuscripts made it eternal. By the 14th century, Timbuktu had become more than a marketplace. It was a university city, a place where students came not to trade, but to think. At its peak, Timbuktu housed three major centers of learning: Sankey University, Jinaba, and Sidi Yahya. Together, they formed the backbone of what some scholars call the Oxford of Africa. But this wasn't European-style education. Students here studied the Quran, but also law, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics, all written in Arabic and Ajami scripts. It was said that a scholar in Timbuktu might debate theology in the morning, treat patients by noon, and recite poetry by evening. And these scholars weren't just religious clerics. They were intellectual elites, respected judges, doctors, scientists, and philosophers. Some owned libraries of over 10,000 manuscripts. The written word was power, and Timbuktu held millions of them. Some of these texts discussed advanced mathematics and astronomy, hundreds of years before the European Enlightenment. Others contained treatises on environmental science, political theory, and even women's rights in Islam. Knowledge in Timbuktu was not chained in the shadows. It was passed down, debated and respected. But even as Timbuktu rose, it was still a fragile jewel, exposed to the winds of empire and the ambitions of kings. One of those kings would change everything and make Timbuktu famous across the world, for better or for worse. If gold built Timbuktu, Mansa Musa made it legendary. Ruling from 1312 to 1337, Mansa Musa was the wealthiest man in recorded history, richer than Bezos, Musk or Rockefeller, and much of that wealth flowed through Timbuktu. But it wasn't his gold that shook the world, it was his pilgrimage. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out for Mecca, across the Sahara, through Cairo, and beyond, with an entourage of 60,000 people, 80 camels, and literal tons of gold. He gave so much gold away in Cairo that he caused inflation for a decade. Egypt's dinar collapsed in value. That's how wealthy this one African king was. But Musa wasn't just showing off. He returned from Mecca with something more powerful than gold: architects, scholars, books, and blueprints. From Cairo and Al-Andalus, he brought back stonemasons like Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, who helped construct Jingiba Mosque, now a World Heritage Site and symbol of West African Islamic architecture. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu became not just rich, it became revered. The Arab world wrote about it in awe. European maps began placing Timbuktu as a golden city in the sands. Scholars traveled across continents to teach and learn there. And most importantly, the manuscript tradition expanded. Libraries grew. Timbuktu's intellectual identity was sealed in ink, parchment, and clay. But fame is a double-edged sword. The more the world heard of Timbuktu's wealth, the more it began to want it. And in time, legends would blow with lies. Gold would attract guns, and the myth would start to consume the truth. By the late 14th century, Timbuktu had become a name whispered across Europe, but not with accuracy. With imagination, medieval European maps showed Timbuktu as a city of solid gold, ruled by an African king who bathed in wealth and ruled over endless riches. European chroniclers, with little understanding of West Africa, built a fantasy of Timbuktu that blurred reality. In their minds, it was Africa's El Dorado, a black mecca of wealth and mystery. But the truth was richer than the myth, not in treasure, but in knowledge. As the age of exploration advanced, European empires were no longer content with stories. They wanted to own what they imagined. By the 17th century, maps showed Timbuktu as a prize, a target. The French, Portuguese, and British sent envoys and spies to locate it. But most failed. The Sahara was brutal, the routes deadly, and Timbuktu remained elusive. In 1828, a young French explorer named René Kelly finally reached the city disguised as a Muslim pilgrim. He had made it. He expected marble palaces, streets of gold. What he found was different. A proud but crumbling city, still rich in knowledge, but scarred by centuries of war and economic decline. To Kelly, Timbuktu was a mass of ill-looking houses, and his disappointment echoed through Europe. They wanted spectacle. Instead, they found dignity and books, and so the myth of Timbuktu collapsed under its own legend. But only in the eyes of those who came looking for gold, not wisdom. But Timbuktu was not done. It would rise again, through resistance, scholarship, and survival. Even when it fell into decline, its spirit endured. But like all ancient cities, it had to weather storms. Even the greatest cities must bow to time, and by the 16th century, Timbuktu faced a storm it could not outthink. In 1591, Soldiers of the Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur marched into the city, not to learn, but to loot. The invading army had gunpowder, something the Mali and Songhai empires had never seen. Timbuktu, the city of scholars, had no defense against firearms. Its libraries were ransacked. Scholars fled. Some were executed. The golden city of learning fell into silence. For centuries after, Timbuktu drifted into obscurity, forgotten by global empires, starved of trade, and slowly buried in sand. But beneath that sand, the manuscripts remained. Hidden in homes, mosques, and underground vaults, hundreds of thousands of handwritten manuscripts survived wars, colonization, and time itself. In the 21st century, Malian historians and local families began to digitize these sacred documents, protecting African knowledge from fire, water, and war. Some of the manuscripts discuss vaccines, astronomy, law, gender rights, and ethics, hundreds of years ahead of their time. Timbuktu may no longer be a trade capital, but it is now a symbol, a reminder that Africa's legacy is not all alone. It is written, preserved, brilliant, and ancient. It is the proof that African minds carved their own place in the global story of knowledge. So, was Timbuktu ever paved in gold? Maybe not literally, but what it gave the world was more valuable. Wisdom, scholarship, peace through thought, and power through literacy. And that is more lasting than any gold coin. In the sand, we found scrolls. In the scrolls, we found truth. And in that truth, we remember who we really are. This is Ancestral Files, uncovering the hidden stories of Africa. Subscribe and be part of history. They call him the Lion King. But before Disney's tale, there was a true Sundiata Keita, born to reshape West Africa. His story is myth and history woven into one. A boy who couldn't walk, who rose to build an empire. This is a journey across time, the birth of legend, the exile of a king, the sowing of destiny. Sugalan, known by storytellers as Buffalo Woman, was sent to the king as a gift from the heavens. She carried more than a child. She carried a warning. Ancient Griots foretold a boy who would shape kingdoms. But when Sundiata was born, he was different. He could not walk, the court ambivalent, the king unsure. Yet legends always begin with a miracle. When Sundiata finally stood, the earth held its breath. Fearful of prophecy, the court exiled mother and son. So began Sundiata's journey, away from royalty, into the crucible of survival. He learned the ways of the jungle, the forest, the cross-desert plains. And over time, his limb healed, but stronger than his gait was his purpose. He wasn't just improving, he was becoming, molded by absence, by humility, by hunger. In his absence, a tyrant rose, Sumoro Kanti, the sorghum king. spread terror, imposing heavy taxes, destroying resistance, kidnapping chiefs. Sumuro cast the land into shadow, and the Mandinka begged for a king to stand again. The prophecy was now a promise. Sundiata answered, gathering an army, drafted from memory, loyalty and pain. The time had come, no longer a boy in exile. Sundiata stood at the head of a coalition from the Mema kingdom, from the lands of the Bombar, the Fulani and the Morsi. Warriors answered his call. Each man brought with him not only weapons, but pain. Pain forged into loyalty, into revolution. They say he spoke not just as a warrior, but as a brother. And when he marched, it was the man people who marched with him. In the year 1235, two forces met at Krina. On one side, Sumuro Kanti, draped in red, feared for his use of sorcery. On the other, Sundiata, backed by unity and destiny. The sky was quiet, the drums began, and then came the war. Sumuro fled. Some say he vanished in smoke. Others say he died in shame. But the truth, the Mandinka were free. With victory came order. At Kongaba, the Mandinka nobles met under a sacred tree to proclaim a new charter, the Kulu Konfauga, one of Africa's oldest known constitutions. Sundiata established a code of justice, equality, and protection of women, families, and property. Long before Europe spoke of democracy, Africa practiced it. Sundiata united 12 kingdoms. He rebuilt trade, protected scholars, welcomed Islam, but preserved man tradition. Mali was not just an empire, it was an idea. Sundiata Keita passed peacefully, but his story lived in song, in legend, in bloodline. His grandnephew, Mansa Musa, would take the Mali Empire to legendary heights. Before Wakanda, before Simba, before the world claimed lands as their kings, Africa had Sundiata. Not born perfect, not born powerful, but born with purpose. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world.